The deadliest day in carrier history. USS Forrestal fire, 1967. July 29, 1967. USS Forrestal, operating off the coast of Vietnam. Flight operations are in full swing. Aircraft being armed, fueled, and prepared for launch. The deck is crowded with jets, ordnance, and sailors. At 10:52 a.m., a Zuni rocket accidentally fires from an F-4 Phantom. The rocket streaks across the deck and slams into an A-4 Skyhawk piloted by Lieutenant Commander John McCain. Yes, the future senator and presidential candidate. The rocket ruptures the Skyhawk's fuel tank. Hundreds of gallons of jet fuel pour onto the deck and ignite. Within seconds, the fire spreads to other aircraft. Old Korean War-era bombs start cooking off in the intense heat. The first bomb explodes, killing dozens of sailors instantly and blowing a massive hole in the flight deck. What followed was the deadliest carrier disaster since World War II. 134 men killed, 161 injured, 21 aircraft destroyed, and a ship nearly lost completely. And it all happened in just over 3 hours. Today, we're examining minute by minute what happened aboard USS Forrestal during the worst day in carrier aviation history. Hit subscribe because this story is devastating and important. The setup to understand what happened, you need to understand the situation aboard Forrestal that morning. The carrier was conducting intensive combat operations. Aircraft were launching strikes against North Vietnam constantly. The operational tempo was brutal. Launch, recover, rearm, refuel, launch again. The crew was exhausted, working 18-hour days. The flight deck was packed. 30 aircraft were spotted, some armed with bombs and rockets, some fueled and ready to launch, some being serviced by maintenance crews. Ordnance was everywhere. Aviation fuel was being pumped into aircraft. It was a tinderbox. Here's a critical detail. Forrestal was carrying old ordnance, bombs left over from the Korean War. These bombs were designed in the 1940s and 1950s, before modern safety features. They had thin casings and were extremely sensitive to heat and shock. Modern bombs have insensitive casings designed to withstand fire for extended periods before exploding. The old bombs aboard Forrestal would cook off, explode, after just a few minutes of fire exposure. The Navy knew these old bombs were dangerous, but they were short on modern ordnance and used what they had. This decision would prove catastrophic. At 10:50 a.m., an electrical fault occurred in an F-4 Phantom parked on the flight deck. The fault sent a surge of electricity through the aircraft's weapon system. This surge triggered the firing circuit of a Zuni rocket mounted on the wing. The Zuni rocket, a 5-inch unguided rocket designed to destroy ground targets, fired without anyone pressing the trigger. It left the launcher rail, streaked across the flight deck, and hit an A-4 Skyhawk parked about 100 feet away. The rocket punched through the Skyhawk's external fuel tank. Hundreds of gallons of JP-5 jet fuel poured onto the deck. The impact created sparks. The fuel ignited. Lieutenant Commander John McCain was in the cockpit of that Skyhawk, preparing for launch. He saw the rocket coming, but couldn't do anything. When the fuel tank ruptured and ignited, he was sitting in the middle of a growing fire. McCain reacted quickly. He pulled himself out of the cockpit, climbed onto the aircraft's refueling probe, and jumped 10 feet down to the deck, landing in the middle of spreading flames. He rolled through fire, his flight suit on fire, and scrambled away from the aircraft. He survived those first critical seconds. Many others didn't. The first explosion. The initial fire was bad but potentially manageable. Sailors grabbed fire extinguishers and ran toward the flames. The flight deck firefighting team rushed forward with foam applicators. If they could smother the fire quickly, they might contain it. But they had less than 2 minutes before everything went to hell. The fire spread under the parked aircraft, heating the bombs hanging from their wings and fuselages. The old Korean War-era bombs started cooking off faster than anyone expected. At 10:54 a.m., just 90 seconds after the initial fire started, the first bomb exploded. The explosion was massive. The 1,000-pound bomb detonated with enough force to create a blast wave that knocked personnel off their feet across the entire flight deck. Shrapnel flew in all directions. The bomb blast created a crater in the deck armor. Sailors in the immediate vicinity were killed instantly. The explosion vaporized some, struck others with shrapnel, and threw still others off the ship into the ocean. The initial blast killed at least 27 sailors who'd been fighting the fire or were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The explosion also ruptured fuel lines running under the flight deck. Those fuel lines that were supposed to have been relocated after design reviews, but weren't. Jet fuel began flowing through the damaged areas, feeding the fire and spreading it below deck. More bombs started cooking off. Another explosion, then another. Each bomb blast sent shrapnel through other aircraft, rupturing more fuel tanks, igniting more fires, and setting off more ordnance. The flight deck became an inferno. Aircraft were burning, exploding, melting. The deck itself was buckling from heat. Ordnance was detonating randomly. Bombs, rockets, ammunition, creating constant explosions that made firefighting nearly impossible. Below deck was even worse. The initial bomb blast had blown holes through the armored flight deck into the spaces below. Burning fuel poured through these holes into the hangar bay, the berthing spaces, and the ship's interior. Sailors sleeping in berthing compartments below the flight deck were awakened by explosions and found themselves trapped in burning spaces filled with toxic smoke. Many died trying to escape through passageways that were filling with fire and fumes. The fight to save the ship. For the next 3 hours, the crew of USS Forrestal fought the most intense shipboard fire in modern naval history. The first challenge, the ship's built-in fire suppression systems were designed for normal fires, not a flight deck covered in burning jet fuel and exploding ordnance. The foam systems couldn't produce enough volume to smother the fire. The water systems couldn't match the intensity of the blaze. So sailors fought the fire the old-fashioned way, with handheld hoses, portable foam generators, and sheer determination. Young sailors, many of them teenagers, ran toward the fire carrying hoses. They advanced into the flames, spraying water and foam, trying to cool ordnance before it could detonate. Some of these sailors were killed when bombs exploded near them. Others kept fighting. The heroes of Forrestal Fire were ordinary sailors doing extraordinary things. Sailors formed human chains, passing ammunition away from the fire to prevent more explosions. Damage control teams entered burning compartments below deck, searching for survivors and fighting fires in enclosed spaces filled with toxic smoke. Sailors with no firefighting training grabbed equipment and joined the fight because every hand was needed. Pilots whose aircraft had been destroyed helped fight the fire instead of evacuating to safety. The ship's officers, many of whom were injured, stayed at their posts coordinating firefighting efforts and damage control. One incredible act of heroism. A chief petty officer picked up a bomb that was visibly smoking, about to explode, and threw it overboard. He saved countless lives and somehow survived without injury. Another sailor drove a tractor into the fire to push burning aircraft overboard. The tractor's tires melted. The sailor kept going until the aircraft were over the side, then abandoned the tractor before it was consumed by flames. The ship's medical department transformed into a mass casualty treatment center. Doctors and corpsmen worked frantically on burned and injured sailors. The sickbay was overwhelmed. They set up triage in passageways and treated the worst cases first. Nearby ships rendered assistance. Destroyers pulled alongside, spraying water onto Forrestal's flight deck from their own fire hoses. Helicopters transported the most critically injured to hospital ships. Other carriers sent damage control teams to help. Aftermath and lessons, by 1:30 p.m., the fire was finally under control. The flight deck was a destroyed wasteland of twisted metal, burned aircraft wreckage, and blast craters. Below deck, entire compartments were gutted. The ship was severely damaged but afloat and under her own power. The human toll was staggering. 134 sailors killed, 161 injured. 21 aircraft destroyed, representing hundreds of millions of dollars in equipment. The ship itself required months of repairs. The investigation began immediately. What caused this disaster? Could it have been prevented? The findings were damning. The electrical fault that fired the Zuni rocket was a known issue. The aircraft should have been grounded for repairs, but operational pressure kept it flying. The old bombs should never have been aboard. Modern ordnance with better safety features was available but not provided in sufficient quantities. Fire suppression systems were inadequate for the types of fires that could occur on a carrier flight deck. Damage control training was insufficient. Many sailors didn't know how to fight fires effectively. Crew fatigue from intense operational tempo contributed to errors and slower reaction times. The Navy implemented sweeping changes based on Forrestal's lessons. All Korean War-era ordnance was removed from carriers and replaced with modern munitions designed to withstand fire. Fire suppression systems were upgraded with better foam generators and higher capacity water systems. Damage control training became more realistic, with live fire training and realistic simulations. Flight deck procedures were revised to reduce ordnance exposure and improve safety. Crew rest requirements were established to prevent fatigue-related errors. These changes probably saved thousands of lives in subsequent decades. Carriers have experienced fires since Forrestal, but none have been as catastrophic because the Navy learned and adapted. The Forrestal fire also changed naval culture. Damage control became a core competency. Every sailor, regardless of job specialty, learned firefighting. The attitude became, everyone is a damage control specialist first, their job specialty second. The USS Forrestal fire remains the deadliest carrier disaster of the modern era. 134 sailors died, many of them barely out of high school, serving their country during wartime. But from this tragedy came lessons that made the entire Navy safer. The sailors who died at Forrestal contributed to changes that prevented future disasters. Their sacrifice led to improvements that protect sailors to this day. The crew of Forrestal demonstrated incredible courage fighting that fire. They saved their ship when many expected it to sink. They pulled survivors from burning compartments. They fought fires while ordnance exploded around them. Their actions exemplified the Navy's core values: honor, courage, and commitment. If this account of the Forrestal fire moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more naval history. Comment below. What other naval disasters and lessons learned should we cover? Share this video to honor the sailors who died aboard Forrestal and to spread the lessons they taught us. Until next time, remember those who serve and sacrifice.